Hello, and welcome to the Nutrition for Running and Performance Clinic. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about properly fueling our bodies for activity of any kind, but we'll focus a little bit more on endurance activity such as running or some sort of cardio event. First off, why is it important that we pay attention to our nutrition when it comes to physical activity? One of the biggest reasons is for the repair of our muscle tissue. When we are doing any kind of physical activity, it causes small little tears in our muscle tissue. A lot of the times we can feel those little tears as soreness. But the repair of those small tears in the muscle tissue is actually what builds our muscles back up to make them stronger than they were before we participated in that activity. So those small little tears are really important for us to be making advances and getting stronger and all those good things that we want to see. In order to repair the muscle tissue, we do have to make sure that we have plenty of amino acids in our diet. Amino acids are what make up a protein. So protein sources such as animal proteins like meats, dairy products, but also plant-based protein sources as well. Something like some quinoa or soy is a complete protein source in a plant-based example. We need about 100 to 160 grams of protein per day. That's a pretty big range in there, but the amount of protein that you need depends on your body weight as well as what type of and how much activity you're participating in on a regular basis. And then I touched on it just a little bit already, but a complementary protein versus a complete protein. A complete protein is a source that has all of the essential amino acids that we need in our diet. Animal products are complete proteins. They have all of the essential amino acids, something like chicken or milk. But a complementary protein is a way to get all of those essential amino acids by a plant-based diet. So beans and rice is an example of a complementary protein because the amino acids that beans do not have, rice does have. So if you eat those two foods within a 24-hour period, that's going to give you a complete protein source and help you make sure that you have all the different amino acids that you need in order to build up all that muscle tissue back and then perform other functions in our bodies that amino acids are really helpful for. If you Google complementary protein examples, there's tons of other complementary proteins out there. So if you are on a plant-based diet or you just want more information about which plant proteins you can pair to get all those amino acids, look at that. And there's plenty of information out there about that. Another really important reason to focus on our nutrition when we are participating in physical activity is to replenish our glycogen stores. When we're eating carbohydrates, any carbohydrate source that we're eating is going to get broken down into smaller sources that we can use in our body for fuel and then gets broken down into glucose. That's the smallest form of a carbohydrate. And glucose is actually the body's preferred fuel source, especially for things like functioning mentally, like our brain functioning really prefers glucose as that fuel source. When we eat a carbohydrate, our body's going to use those broken down carbohydrates in the form of glucose in various ways throughout our body. And then if we have an excess amount of carbohydrates than what our body needs at that given time, our body is actually going to store those. It's going to convert from glucose into glycogen, and then that glycogen is going to get stored in our muscle tissues and in our liver. So we can actually utilize those glycogen storages when we go to participate in our next activity or as our body's just looking for an energy source throughout the day. It can convert that glycogen back into glucose and then use that. A note there is that The glycogen that's stored in our muscle tissues has to be used in that specific muscle tissue. So if we have some glycogen stored in our leg, then it's going to get converted into glucose and used for the energy process that's happening in our lower body. However, the glycogen that's stored in our liver tissue does get used in the bloodstream throughout our bodies. Most of us need a range from 300 to 800 grams of carbohydrates per day. Again, that's a pretty wide range. In order to find something that's a little bit more specific to you, there are calculations out there that can be done, give you a little bit more of an exact estimation of how many grams of carbohydrate a day you should be using. I prefer to use a little bit more of an intuitive source for that. So a lot of the times if we're having cravings, things like that, that could be one way that our body is telling us that we need to get a little bit of carbohydrates in to our bloodstream. Also, vitamin and mineral replenishment is really important when we're participating in physical activity, but especially if we're participating in something like an endurance activity. Vitamins and minerals like sodium, potassium, calcium, chloride, iron, vitamin C, vitamin D, and our B vitamins are all really important for muscle contraction, blood cell production, and tons of other functions in our bodies that we need to make sure we've got all those vitamins and minerals for in order to be performing at our very best and to make sure that we're not going to hit fatigue or something like that as well. Nutrient-dense foods contain a lot of our vitamins and minerals. We can get a lot of the sources that we need from foods like vegetables, grains, fruits. The wider variety of foods that we are eating, the more vitamins, minerals we're going to get from our diet. However, we can always supplement with vitamin pills, multivitamins, things like that as well. A lot of the times, it's just a good way to make sure that we are properly getting vitamins and minerals. Again, though, you might start to see signs that you're deficient in something like iron if you're really feeling fatigued, something, like vitamin C if you're starting to feel like you're getting sick a lot. That can also be a cue that we might not be getting all those vitamins and minerals. We need to either boost the variety of foods that we're eating or go ahead and take a multivitamin. We are also getting hydration from a lot of our food sources, which is obviously really important for our bodies performing the way that we want them to. Being properly hydrated is key to feeling our best, having lots of energy, and performing physical activities. One other thing we can do to help boost some of those vitamins and minerals is to put an electrolyte supplement into our water. So it's kind of like a 2-for-1 way to do a little bit of both in those. And if we are participating in endurance activities, one way to know how much water we lost in sweat during that activity is to do a sweat test. So weigh ourselves before we run a marathon and then weigh ourselves after we run a marathon. And the weight that was lost in that race is lost in sweat. So that weight loss can determine how much water we need to drink in order to properly rehydrate back to where we were before that event. And then it's also key to remember that if we are sweating quite a bit in an endurance activity, we're also losing really key minerals like sodium through our sweat that we need to make sure to replenish. So that electrolyte supplement can help with that as well. Before we are participating in some sort of physical activity is what we're going to focus on right now and talk a little bit about what is the best thing for us to eat before we exercise. And this varies between person to person quite a bit because some people can really handle eating right before they participate in a physical activity. Some people cannot handle eating within a few hours of physical activity. You really kind of have to experiment with what makes you feel your very best before a workout or before a run or something like that. Ideal timing would be somewhere around an hour before you work out to make sure that you are getting some sort of supplement if you can handle eating within that time period. Something about 100 to 200 calories is a good range there. Not a whole lot, but just enough to fuel us. You want that pre-physical activity um, meal to be a very high carbohydrate content, moderate to low protein, low fat, and very low fiber. Carbohydrates are a very quick energy source. Our body can convert that into that glucose that we need very quickly and then utilize that right away for energy production. We don't want a lot of protein, fat, or fiber because those things will take a long time to digest. So it slows the absorption of our foods through our stomach, through our intestines, which in other circumstances is a good thing. We want that sometimes, but before a workout, we want to try to not have something sitting in our stomach or sitting in our intestines as we're trying to exercise or do some sort of endurance activity. Also, another good thing to consume pre-workout is caffeine. Caffeine obviously is a great energy boost for us if we're going to go participate in physical activity, but it also has been shown to help with the glycogen reuptake post-exercise. So those carbohydrates that we're consuming before and after our workout are more likely to be converted into glycogen and stored in our liver and muscle tissue with a little bit of caffeine in our system. Something around 200 to 300 milligrams before activity is a good range, or something like a cup of coffee. Here's just a few examples of some ideas of what we can eat before we participate in physical activity. Carrots with ranch, some trail mix, pita chips and hummus, avocado toast or peanut butter toast, nut butter toast, or just a cup of coffee. And then let's talk a little bit about what to eat during physical activity. So if we're going to be consuming something while we are participating in physical activity, that's really only necessary if that physical activity is going to be an hour or longer. So for like a 30-minute workout or something like that, we really don't need to be worried about getting nutrition during that activity because our bodies don't really have time to use that properly, and sometimes it can get in the way of what we're trying to do. But for that endurance activity, like a marathon, triathlon, something of that nature, we do need to make sure that we are refueling those carbohydrate sources because we're going to burn out of them before that activity is done. So when we are fueling during an endurance activity, we want to make sure it's the simplest form of carbohydrate possible so that our bodies have to do very little work to break that down into glucose and then use it right away. We can also just consume glucose products, and that directly gets into our bloodstream. We can use that for energy right away. Fructose is also a good example of simple carbohydrate that we can readily use, and a lot of fructose comes from fruit. So fruit chews, things like that can be used for physical activity, or honey is also a good example of that. So here, there's a picture here of a product you can actually buy. Clif, the company Clif, sells these endurance activity chews. They have gels, things like that are great, easy, and they're specifically formulated for physical endurance activities. Also, honey, candy, fruit chews, Gatorade is also a good example of something that could be readily absorbed and used as energy. Post-physical activity might be one of the most important things for us to focus on when we're talking about nutrition for physical activity, because technically post-workout nutrition counts for the rest of your day after your activity, maybe into the next day, depending on what time you participated in that activity during the day. Post-activity, you still do want to make sure that you are focused on getting those carbohydrates replenished, but then we're also going to focus on getting some more of that protein, those amino acids, into our diet as well. So a good range for that would be 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 carbohydrate to protein ratio in that post-activity snack. Around 9 to 30 grams of protein is a good range for that snack. That's obviously a very wide range as well, but just depends on what you can tolerate, how much you're eating after your physical activity. If you're working out in the morning, then we're talking about the rest of the day. If you're working out at night, then maybe we're just talking about one meal or snack after that physical activity. We do have a window of increased amino acid uptake after exercise, so that muscle repair happens at an increased rate after we exercise. Commonly, it was thought for quite some time that you wanted to make sure to get those amino acids, those proteins in 30 minutes after activity, but a lot of studies are showing that there's a wider window for us to get amino acids after our workout and have them readily absorbed. So most experts say 24 hours after activity, just make sure to get that proper protein into your diet. A general range of protein for most people is 1 to 1.7 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, or a half a pound to 0.5 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. And then similarly, 5 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight is a range for carbohydrates there. I didn't convert that into pounds, but you can also do a converter from kilograms to pound if you wanted to see that in pounds of body weight instead of kilograms. Some ideas for post-exercise snacks would be yogurt with some fruit, a banana and nut butter in a tortilla roll-up. Chocolate milk is a great post-exercise snack. It's got lots of protein and then that sugar range that's good for following up our exercise. Egg bites are great and convenient. Cottage cheese and toast is also a good example there of that carbohydrate to protein range that we're shooting for. Here are some sources for the information from today's presentation. If you're interested in checking out any of those sources, they are listed here for you as well. Thank you so much for checking out the Nutrition for Running and Performance video. If you have any questions, please contact the fitness program. Our email is fitnessprogram@dolby.com.